So today let's talk about dahlias in the fall and specifically how and why you should consider overwintering them this year. We're in my yard today because I happen to love dahlias and have been growing them for close to 5 years. And a bunch of my plants here happen to be about 3 years old, going on to their fourth. I have had a lot of trial and error with dahlias, and as such, I don't have any 5 year ones because my first year I made a lot of errors. So I'm going to tell you what to do with dahlias because I've made mistakes and had successes with what I've got here. So let's go through it. So first off, if you're not aware, dahlias are actually a perennial in warmer zones. They come back year over year and get stronger, bigger, and better. Here in Alberta, not so much. They do not like the cold, and so if left outside, they will just die and rot and become decent compost for you, but you're not going to get a big, nice plant in the spring. However, here in Alberta, we are able to overwinter them and plant them the next year. And why would you want to do that? Well, just like any other perennial, every year they're going to come back bigger and better for you. They will be a larger plant, you're going to get more blooms, and you're going to get larger blooms. Where overwintering really comes into play is with your dinner plate varieties. This is my Cafe au Lait, and this is its third year that I've had this plant. And this is, to be honest, probably the smallest bloom that I have gotten on this plant this year. Year one, I got quite a few blooms, but they were only about this large. Year two, I got maybe 3 or 4 blooms that were about this size. And this year I got to the true dinner plate size with the 8 to 10 inches across, and I probably got 8 of those blooms. If you want those big, huge, showy blooms, you will need a more mature plant, which means a more mature tuber that you have overwintered. As far as how to overwinter your dahlias, it's actually not as hard as you think. So we're going to go through a few of the steps. It's a little bit early in the season right now, so I'm just going to demonstrate what to do with one of the dahlias that I don't plan to overwinter this year so that you know what to do when it actually happens. When we get our first hard frost is when it is going to be time to start looking at overwintering your dahlias. So after the first hard frost, the foliage on your plant is going to blacken. Obviously, right now, that has not happened, but I took a clipping from this plant and stuck it in the freezer so that you can kind of see what it's going to look like after a hard frost. So you can kind of tell, it's a little bit easy to tell when it's ready to be overwintered. You're going to want your foliage to look like this because that means that the plant is done. It's not going to be coming back after this, and it will have sent all of its energy down to the tuber to store for the winter. So we're going to pretend that this whole plant looks like this for now, and we're going to go through the steps of what to do. So, boom. Once your plant has gone and blackened, you're going to want to grab your snips, and you're going to want to cut about 6 inches up from the soil all of the foliage off. So we're just going to take this and snip all of this off like that, like that. We'll get rid of our foliage. Once you've cut off the foliage like this, you're going to want to leave the tuber in the pot for 3 to 7 days to allow it to harden off and get a tougher skin so that it's less likely to rot while you're overwintering it. You want to be careful because it will not handle freezing. So if it's looking like you might get another frost, you might want to move it closer to the house or into a protected garage or something so that it does not freeze. If they freeze, you will lose the tuber. It's not going to survive. Once 3 to 7 days have gone by, you're going to want to dig out your tuber. Now, I have mine in a pot here, so it's a little bit easier to get out than if you, say, had it in the ground, but you still need to do the same steps. So you're going to want a little garden rake, trowel, fork, what is this called? You're going to want to use a spade fork, which is what this thing is called, to loosen your tuber out of the soil. Now, why don't you want to use a shovel? Because more than likely you're going to puncture your tuber and potentially even destroy it. I have not used a spade fork in the past, and every single time, no matter how careful I am, I manage to pierce and destroy a tuber because they're always bigger and deeper than you expect them to be. You're going to take your spade fork and you're just kind of start working the soil, loosening it up so that you can try and get this tuber out of here. You do have this nice stem here to work as a handle to help you kind of pull your tuber out. Just be careful not to actually rip it out because you're liable to rip off the entire stem and then you're left with not a tuber that's going to be as ideal for overwintering. So we're just going to kind of work into our soil, try and loosen this thing up. you can watch me struggle. So as a note, this is a 3rd-year tuber, so it's pretty big. I'm not sure how deep it's gonna go, but you'll get to see a more mature tuber. So we'll get to see together how big it is. Okay, so this is not how I expected this to go, but as you can tell, this is a fairly well-developed dahlia. So I'm going to go shake off all this dirt to try and find where this plant actually is. Okay, so we now have our tuber here, and as you can see, it's quite large. There's a lot going on here. Now at this point, you're gonna wanna try and get off as much dirt as possible. Just kind of brush it off. If you don't have to, don't rinse it off. It's usually not too much of an issue to have some dirt on there, and you're gonna just wanna kind of get in there, get off as much as you can. Once your dahlia is at this stage, you're going to want to let it dry for another 24 to 48 hours, again, somewhere where you do not have to worry about frost. This especially would be the point where you might want to bring it into your garage or into a protected dark space, put it on some newspaper or something, and let it dry out so that this tuber can develop that hardened skin to just help prevent rot over the winter. These things are going to dry out for you quickly, so don't leave them too long. You're going to want to get them into your overwintering material within that 48-hour period. So we have now left our dahlia to dry for 24 to 48 hours. In theory, we definitely have not done that with this. But at that point, you're going to want to get the rest of the dirt off of it that you can. And you have the option at this point that you could look at dividing your tubers. Personally, I would recommend, if you can, wait until spring to do that. You do need an eye for the tuber for it to actually produce a plant, and those can sometimes be a little bit difficult to see in the fall. So in the spring, it'll have started to sprout, so it's a lot easier to see where you should and could divide. That's your call, but that's just my recommendation personally. When it comes to this point, I like to trim my stems down a little bit more. It just makes them easier to store. And so I just kind of chop them down a little bit more just so that there's not as much sticking out. And you can also trim off these roots here. Again, it just helps with space, but also if you're worried about rot, these can lead to rot issues earlier. So you can just snip off some of those to clean it up a little bit and reduce your risk of losing these tubers. At this point, you are ready to put your dahlia into storage. You're going to want to mark what type of dahlia it is. I would recommend using a permanent marker and actually writing on the tuber itself. I have tried everything. I've tried post-it notes, I've tried popsicle sticks, I've tried string. Those things can rot, they can fall apart, you can misplace them, and then you just end up with a mystery tuber in the spring that you just kind of have to grow and guess what color it is. So if you write it directly on the tuber, it's just a way that you don't have to worry about that, and it's not going to hurt the plant. As far as storage options, I have tried a lot of different things, so I'm just going to go with what has worked for me. I have tried the newspaper, I've tried the sawdust, I've tried the other things, and all of my tubers have either desiccated or rotted. So I would recommend using vermiculite. That's what I use every year. And as I mentioned, I have quite a few dahlias, so I need quite a bit of vermiculite. And what I love about vermiculite is that you are able to save it from year to year. So this is all of my vermiculite from last year, and I will be using it again this year for my dahlias. And I find it's one of the best options for keeping things moist enough that they survive, and it's really easy to remist and rehydrate if you need to. What I do is I get some water and mist down my vermiculite when I'm getting ready to store so that your tubers have some moisture to survive, but it's not going to be damp in there and causing rot. Obviously, you can't just coat them in vermiculite, you need somewhere to store them. So what I like to use actually, and I guess apparently shout out to Superstore here, is these grocery bags that we all have and have a million of them. I like that they are cloth fabric, so they hold the vermiculite and the mess really well, but they allow moisture to drain out, so I don't have to worry about it kind of retaining that moisture and causing rot. You are welcome to use whatever you'd like, just do not use a plastic bag or anything that is not going to allow that liquid to escape. And then because I don't want just a bunch of little bags sitting everywhere, I also have these little plastic wicker baskets that I bought, and I just put my bags in there, and that allows there still to be airflow to happen, but it contains the mess, it contains the dahlia, and it's easier for me in the spring to kind of like move everything, and I know where stuff's at. I'm able to mark my boxes, So it's just a way to kind of stay organized, and I'm not super organized, so this is what works for me. Once you have your tuber all stored up in your vermiculite or whatever you choose to use, you're going to want to store it in a cool, dark place. For me, that is in my basement underneath the stairs. You're ideally going to want to keep them around 4 to 10 degrees Celsius and in the dark. My basement is definitely a little bit warmer, but it's pitch black. So I have had success in that. The one thing is you just want to be careful not to go below that 4-degree mark because you don't want to risk them getting too cold and dying. Through the winter months, you're going to want to check on your dahlias about once a month to make sure that they're not getting too dry. Here in Edmonton, definitely our worry is more desiccation and shriveling. You're less likely to see rot on them just because it's really dry here. So you're more than likely going to need to rehydrate whatever your material is. So with vermiculite, I just have one of those misters that you can like use on your face, and I just mist down my vermiculite, mix it up a little bit to get a bit more moisture in there to keep the tuber healthy and happy. To keep up with that over the winter, in February, March, you're able to take your dahlias out and they will have started to sprout. And at that point, you're going to want to start pre-growing them indoors because with our very short growing season here, dahlias need to be pre-started indoors if you want to see success with them. I typically start them in March. I started a few of them way too early this year, and that's why you see a few of them being super leggy and weird. So again, learn from my mistakes. Don't start them in January. Start them in late February or March, and they will then be a mature enough plant that once the risk of frost has passed, you'll be able to plant them outside, and they will grow into these incredible dahlias that we all know and love. There are not many flowers that can really compete with not only the amount of blooms you'll get out of the dahlias, but the amount of colors, the amount of flower forms, and honestly, the size that you can get out of them. Again, this one is not doing justice to what a true dinner plate can be. They are definitely worth the effort and something that is definitely doable for you. So hopefully this helped you, and let us know if you have any questions.